Two. Congrats, you made it. So we have a lot to cover, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I do want to keep this under 30 minutes because I know everyone is super busy, but there's a lot of good info that I want to share with you today. So here's the presentation. Restoring your gut health. This week. First, we're going to be talking about plant-based diet. Why is it so important to have a plant-based, colorful, seasonal, organic, and local diet for your gut health specifically? Then we're going to talk about food combining. What is the best way to understand what kind of type of foods should I mix for the most efficient digestion process? Then we're going to talk about the real deal with gluten. What is gluten and the reasons to avoid it? Then gluten, it's everywhere. So I'm going to tell you some of the hidden areas in which gluten might be found, and also talk about whole grains and what are some of the alternatives to grains with gluten and gluten-free grains. Next, about our common enemy, sugar. What is it? Why are we addicted to it? And how do we stop the cycle? So plant-based. Let's just refocus here. And so plant-based, it doesn't mean that you should be eating plants all the time, but it means that you should be eating plants. Why? I have a research study that it's been quoted here in this page, and basically plant-rich diets have proven to successfully help you reduce weight, obesity, prevent cancer, reverse diabetes type 2, increase energy, vitality, as well as improve your mood, your sleeping. So it has been proven already. Now it's just a matter of how do we apply it. And how do we apply it? We apply it in doing things like this program, which if you look at your recipes, it's going to be 80% plant-based. You do have some animal protein, you have some good, and remember, it's all about the fat, the fiber, and the protein when you're composing meals, and that's how the program is being designed. So you're gonna have that in every meal that you're having. I want to talk a little bit about phytonutrients here. So phytonutrients are the non-traditional plant nutrients. What I mean by that is the traditional nutrients or the components of a meal will be whether it is carbohydrates, which is really fiber in the case of our meal, because we're going to have good carbohydrates. So fiber, protein, fats. Then we have the vitamins. Then the meals have the foods have their minerals, and then it's everything else. So that everything else is what we call phytonutrients. And phytonutrients are responsible for the taste of the food, how the foods look, smell, and each color, it's so important because it's going to focus on different parts of our body. They have different objectives. So it is important to get a variety of colors. And it is also important to get meals seasonal or to eat seasonally. The reason for comes from the Garden of Life. So essentially, the best nutrition comes from the closest, more freshest ingredients that you can have, and those are the ones that are produced in the season. Also, it is important for the veggies and the fruits that you have to be organic. Now, just because it says organic in a label doesn't mean that it's healthy. So there are a lot of like organic breads that aren't necessarily going to be great for us, or organic pastas, for instance. So the whole point here is try to for your veggies and your fruits to be organic. I know they can be expensive at times. However, nowadays there's so much pesticides and chemicals that are being put into our produce that it's so important that we make an effort to try to do organic. And even if you can do organic, because that could be some expensive sometimes for the farmers to get that stamp, the USDA approval of organic, it is also good for you to go local. So ideally, and I have it listed here in terms of list of priorities when you're buying your veggies and your fruits, you want to make sure first it's organic, then look at organic and local will be ideal, because the farther the produce is, the more preservatives they're sprayed on with, the more chemicals they add so that they preserve better. And so ideally, you want to make sure that it's organic and local. If you can find organic and local, then just do local produce. In New York, we have a lot of apples in this season, pears as well. So it depends on where you are. And then if it is hard for you to find local, then organic and far away will be ideal. Classic example will be avocados from Mexico. It's very far, so you want to try to get them. A little bit about the colors and what that means and what they mean in your food. So, for instance, if we have red food, so the tomatoes, the watermelons, the cabbages, these contain a lot of phytochemicals that are there to reduce the free radical damage in our bodies. So also they're great when to reduce the effect of the sun when we get burned, to reduce the effects of the sun in the skin. So that's what red foods are for. Orange foods, carrots, pumpkin, squashes, sweet potatoes, they have a lot of carotenoids. And so ideally for your eyes, for the night vision, we've heard this before. Oh, they have a little vitamin A, and vitamin A is great for the to help heal the internal lining of our gut, and that's something that we're going to be talking about today, since we're going to be talking about gluten. Yellow foods like green peas, collard greens, avocados, they contain carotenoids, and they help you reduce the risk of cataracts, cataracts, helping reducing the risk of osteoporosis as well. The orange and the yellow foods like the orange, the pineapples, the tangerines, the papaya, they have high antioxidants and vitamin C. So that helps with to improve also the mucous membranes, and also the circulation and prevents inflammation. So there you have it. Oh wait, hold on. We have also green onions, like white colors, white and green foods, onions, garlic, celery. They have great phytochemicals and minerals to help with the joints. And then they can also be great as antibiotic, as we know onions have that capability. And then we have red, purple, and blue. These are like apple, beets, strawberries, cranberries. They're rich in antioxidants, and they help protect against heart disease and in improving circulation as well. So these are just little samples of the idea of this food philosophy of eating colorful, like eating the rainbow. This is why, seasonal and organic. Okay. Now, organic. It can be expensive to buy everything organic. So I've listed here the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen that the EWG posts us every year. And so this is for 2019. And we have the Clean 15 things that you could buy because they have the lowest amount of pesticide that are not organic. So onions will be great, pineapple, avocado, asparagus, sweet pea. So you have them there. And then the Dirty Dozens, these are things that you do not want to buy non-organic because they have the highest pesticide content. So if you want a screenshot, this is a moment for it if you're like me. Also, if you're like me, you want to grab a pen and a pencil, a pen and a paper, so that you can write down questions that you may have and ask me in our Q&A sessions about anything that we're talking about here. Combining. So understanding the best way to combine foods for a more effective digestion. So I have a chart that I like to refer to. It can be a little complicated. You can screenshot it if you want to, but essentially the circles that mix together are good for you to mix in terms of the meals that you're having. So you have, I'm gonna simplify it for you because they divide it into starchy, non-starchy veggies, proteins, and fat. So very similar to what you're gonna have in your protocols, but I made it just way more simple. So first, you try to have them by themselves or in your smoothies and in the morning. So that's the best way because the fruits digest fast. Happens is if we have fruits combined with, let's say, meat, because they do this like mango I think it's a mango sauce with a steak, for instance, then what happens is it takes a lot of time for the meat to digest, and the fruit, it really gets digested very quickly. So instead of being moved through our digestive system, it sits there kind of waiting for the hydrochloric acid and the enzymes to get rid of to digest the meat. And so while it sits there, it can start to putrefy. It can prevent it can make you feel bloated, inflamed. So the idea here is to combine the foods that have more of a similar digestion time, so that they move faster through the digestive process. So we mix the veggies and the proteins, and the fats as well. They have more or less a similar time of digesting, and then you want to do the veggies and the grains. Now, when we digest proteins, we need different type of enzymes, and to digest grains, we need different type of enzymes. So it makes the body work harder if we combine the wrong thing. So combining steaks and rice, or steak and beans, is just really hard to digest as well. And you don't have to worry about this, because everything in your protocol is being laid out so that it's in the most digestive, effective way possible. So don't worry about it. It's just more for your information. If you do happen to go to a restaurant, just try to keep this in mind. Okay, so animal protein with veggies, ideally, fruits by themselves. When I keep make sure I'm on time. So what is the real deal with gluten? And what are some of the reasons to avoid it? It's also a glue, and it can be found in cereal grains. So things like wheat, barley, and rye are the most are the places where you can find gluten the most. Now, there are two different types of proteins in the gluten. One is the gliadin, which gives bread that ability to rise during baking, and the second one is the glutenin, and this is responsible for the elasticity of the dough. Now, you're gonna find, as we go into the presentation, that gluten can be also found in barbecue sauce, for instance, and it's because they add it to either add more of a gluey consistency into the sauce. So we want to be careful when we are in a gluten-free lifestyle type of diet, that you just really look at the things that say gluten-free, or that you make most of your stuff at home, which is ideal. Now, to avoid it. Why gluten is becoming more of an issue now versus like 100 years ago? Right now we have there's a range of people being very intolerant to gluten, very sensitive, and very allergic. So even if you've been diagnosed with celiac disease, IBS, or even leaky gut, you are in some of this, in a part of this spectrum. So that even if you haven't been diagnosed with for these 5 weeks, you try to remove it, so that you feel whether you were being because it's really hard to diagnose, but once you remove it, you realize whether you're sensitive or not, because you do it's and you feel better. So that's the main reason why we're avoiding gluten, is because I want you to understand whether you are sensitive, you are intolerant, you might be diagnosed with some kind of gluten sensitivity. And so the main reason why it is important it is different from now than before is because the way our wheat and our grains have been processed has changed over. The cultivation methods have changed. The seeds are sprayed with fungicides, insecticides, so they become very toxic. Also, they spray hormones to speed germination. Insecticides are sprayed. Fumigation is applied once the grains are being stored. And then they're refining the grain. We're going to talk about more. We're going to talk more about the importance of eating the whole grain. As we refining it, the flours are processed in smaller batches. They're fresher, but they're removing the key parts of the grain, and so, and again, very toxic, as I mentioned, because the process has changed from 100 years ago to where it is now. Um, all it is that natural wheat germ, it's rancid, and it gets rancid as fast as milk. And if you think about it, when you look at the bread that it's been on the shelf, they can last, oh my God, I don't know, forever. So they also incorporate in radiation in 1969. So these are things that we want to ask ourselves, do we really want to add these into our body? Probably not, right? So hope that's clear. Now, in our bodies when we eat gluten. Now, if you place your hands in your belly button, right behind your belly button, there is a small intestine. It's highlighted here. I can annotate, but I want. So your small intestine. And so what happens is within the small intestine, you can see in the small intestine, you can see that the internal lining of it, it's they have finger-like projections, are called the villi, and it's a healthy sign. Small intestine, it's like this, they're all together, nothing goes inside. But when you have celiac disease, or if you have certain kind of gluten sensitivity or leaky gut, it means that those villi are starting to open. And what happens is now there is a space in which different kind of food components can go into the bloodstream, and our bodies are going to start attacking it. It creates inflammation. It creates feel like you have to go to the bathroom, episodes of diarrhea. There's many of things that are being, which brings me to the next patient, that are being linked to leaky gut or intestinal impermeability, which is that is essentially the internal linings, not only the small intestine, but also the long intestine and even in the esophagus. These guys are being damaged, and so it's been proven that already has plays a role in conditions such as celiac disease, Crohn's, IBS, irritable bowel disease. However, now this is why it's important that we avoid gluten, and this is why I think it's important that most people everyone really stays away from gluten, even though it's really hard. It's because they can be associated to other conditions, autoimmune diseases specifically, things like multiple sclerosis. If you have chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, arthritis, or allergies, asthma, even eczema or acne, everything nowadays is being really related to this intestinal impermeability or the leaky gut. So if you haven't been diagnosed, no worries. You should still avoid it, at least for these 5 weeks. Make it a goal to avoid it and see how you feel. Because again, research has shown that gluten, because of the protein that is being damaging the internal linings, or are causing the leaky gut, even if you don't have celiac disease. So I'm going to go back again just to explain. Once what happens is the villi, the protein, so from gluten, going to start damaging the internal, then they can go inside of our bloodstream. So that's why it is so important to stay away from gluten for these 5 weeks and see how you feel. Gluten is everywhere. Now, I'm going to talk about how to replace it and where is it hitting. I don't know. So some medications, some supplements can contain gluten. Some oats, even though there's, but since they've been processed in factories where there is other grains, there could be cross. I try to stay away from gluten as from oats as much as I can. I don't digest them well, anyways. Most processed foods have gluten in it because again, it also acts like a glue. Grains, like I mentioned before, rye, barley, some spices, and some spices and extras for cookings, for packaged foods like sandwich. All of these can have gluten. Barbecue sauce, like I mentioned, breaded fish, anything breaded has gluten. Bread, of course, canned soups, dry soups, cereals and cookies, cakes, coffee. It's made with flavored potato chips, frozen foods, pasta, and pie. So this is just, there's more a comprehensive list that I was able to gather. Now, let's, because I want to jump into the gluten-free grains, but I want you to understand the importance of grains in our lives. Things like amaranth, of course, after this. But essentially, a lot of grains, the whole grain have antioxidants, they have phytonutrients, they have vitamins, minerals that are important for our health. Now, what happens is nowadays, to make this more of a refined um, flour, they are removing the bran and the germ, and they're just leaving the endosperm, which is this part right here, the white part, which is like the starchy carbohydrate. And then if you look at this image, the bran has B vitamins, the minerals. The germ has the B vitamins as well, vitamin E and healthy fats. So essentially, you want to make sure that the grains that you consume are whole. And let's move into the grains that are gluten free. So things like high level of complete protein. Brown rice is very easy to digest. Is why is one of the first things that we give to babies. Buckwheat, it has antioxidants. It can help improve circulation. Millet, I'm mentioning this because we're going to be adding them into the recipes little by little. The first one that we added this week is quinoa because it's what we're more familiar, most people are familiar with, and it's a complete protein. So whenever you have quinoa, it helps you with that protein, fiber, fat that you want to have in every meal. We also have oats, like I mentioned, make sure they are gluten-free, they're labeled gluten-free, and teff that has twice the iron as other grains. So teff is also a great one. Enemy, sugar. What happens to our body when we eat sugar? Why do we sabotage ourselves? And how do we get rid of it? Blood sugar, the sugar in your blood. And after we eat different meals is this kind of like, of course, the blood in our sugar, the sugar in our blood is going to rise because we're eating and we're getting energy. However, the idea is that this becomes kind of like this kind of a spike of sugar. So it's not like peaks and valleys, right? We don't want to have peaks and valleys. We want to have mountains and beaches. So this is the analogy that I use for understanding how the levels of the sugar in our blood should look like. Now, why is it that we are addicted to the sugar? Obviously, when we do eat sugar, there's also the release of dopamine. So the body feels great, and so we we happy, and so in order to kind of like disconnect from that. However, the consequences are worse. Um, I'm gonna talk about the process of insulin resistant and why if you are experiencing any of these symptoms, you might have insulin resistance. So let's talk about what happens when you eat sugar, for instance. So when you eat sugar, that is going to increase your blood sugar or your glucose levels, right? So and glucose is essentially the sugar in our once the sugar is being digested and decomposed, it becomes glucose. So in our blood, then the pancreas releases the insulin, which is a hormone that is going to bring this sugar or the glucose into our cells. So it's like a Pac-Man. The sugar is right here. Think about it. And then the Pac-Man is the insulin. And it's coming like this, and it's pushing it into the cell. So the cell has the glucose, and that's what we use for all the thing that cells do, like redoing the muscles, or even like our strength or their energy. So like we use everything. The cells are in every process. So once the sugar goes into a cell, this it's full. Like there's nothing else. Like there's no more sugar that can go in. So if you have an excess of sugar, the Pac-Man is gonna keep bringing the insulin. The insulin is gonna keep bringing the sugar into the cell, but you can now it's gonna be stored as fat. So any excess insulin gets stored as fat. And once it gets stored as fat, and this repeats a couple of times, then the pancreas is already being alerted to give more insulin. And then so you're always going to have like high levels of insulin trying to swipe away the excess glucose and store it as fat. And so in order for us to kind of like break this cycle, we need to cycle in which we're not going to get our sugar levels to be mountains, to be peaks and valleys, but mountains and beaches. So the problem, like I mentioned before, is that there is an excess of insulin because the body gets used to, and the pancreas gets used to having so much glucose in our bloods that they just continue to produce insulin, and then they store that as fat. And so then you get the insulin resistance issue. So if you're craving for sugars, if you're constantly hungry, if you feel fatigue, migraines, and then if you have upper abdominal obesity, like around your hips and around your belly button, that is also a sign of insulin resistance. So we don't have to get into the details of this. There's also a whole other sugar class that I like to do, but just for you to get an understanding of what happens when sugar in our blood spike. But I want to tell you there is a solution. And the solution is to have low glycemic sweeteners. So things like coconut sugar, monk fruit, and stevia, I added them in here too. This is what we're adding vitamin B also, because it helps regulating the insulin. Ideally, you want to have complex carbohydrates, and that's what we're having here, not simple carbohydrates, because simple carbohydrates get the sugar levels to spike right away versus the complex. Since you have the fiber in it, it takes a little bit longer to digest, and you don't have a spike in sugar. So we are processed foods, and your recipes have a little bit of honey here and there, and that's fine. However, if you are more into the insulin resistant type of stage, you want to try to stay away even from honey as much as possible and replace it with stevia. I think I made it in less than 30 minutes. It was one of the feedbacks that I got. So hopefully this was helpful. Do write any questions that you might have, and let's just connect in the Q&A. See you in the next video.